Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Dr. David Klingsmith, and I'm excited to introduce today's second session. We're grateful to be joined today by Drs. Joni Maga and Dr. George Machowski. Making sure I said that right. Dr. Maga is an associate professor in clinical anesthesiology at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She also holds multiple leadership roles within the university in the Department of Anesthesiology. She heads the UMJMH Center for Patient Safety and serves as vice chair in the Department for Quality and Process Improvement. She also serves in a teaching role as a longitudinal clinical educator within the medical school. Dr. Maga will be speaking today on driving engagement. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Maga.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Is this a good distance? Okay. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. We're going to talk about engagement. I'm going to try to make it engaging. Thank you for being here this morning. I love this room. I think it's just so beautiful, and I love how there's people up here and people down here. If you have a question, and you could wait till the end, but if it's something pertinent you want to talk about then, just raise your hand. I'll try to see you. Okay. As you know, this is about workplace engagement and what it means to you and why you should care and what you can do to facilitate engagement and why you would want to. As I was preparing this talk, I was waffling between, wow, this is such a timely topic. This is going to be great. And then the opposite. Wow, this is really untimely, post-pandemic. And now I'm going to be talking to people about what they can do even more and what they can bring even more when they've already laid it all out. But anyways, you're here today, and thank you for being here. Briefly, objectives. This is just 30 minutes, so we're going to kind of breeze through this. But what's the difference between engagement and satisfaction? What are the nuances there? Another objective would be to identify examples of poor as well as rich engagement, and 3 strategies to improve engagement. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I am an ABA board examiner. We are going to use Slido today, so I need you to get out your smartphones and get the QR code. We're going to use polling, and you're going to be able to see each other's answers. This is my attempt to make my engagement talk more engaging. It will make it a little bit more fun. So when you can, please put your camera right on one of those codes, and we will start with something easy. This is anonymous polling, so we won't be able to see who said what. You'll have another chance. So we're going to start with an easy one. Just test it out. Where are you joining us from? Whoa. So a lot of people from New York. The Don. I'm coming from Miami, but I'm originally from Ohio. I already met someone from literally the town that I was raised in, and he's there now. Mars. I feel like that sometimes too. All right, fun, cool. All right, let's do one more. Which emoji describes your current state of mind? It's cold in here. Ooh, is that a race car? All right, y'all. Thank you, everybody. Okay, one more for now. Have you ever been asked to participate in an engagement survey in your current position? I definitely have, but I can tell you not since the pandemic. I don't think they want to know where we stand right now. Okay, so we got a couple more people. Oh, we have 27 people right now. That's great. All right, 61 to 39. All right, so why are our organizations doing this? And if we're not doing it, why should we be doing it? What does it mean? Are they trying to see if we're happy, committed, satisfied? It's honestly not just a popular buzzword. Engagement surveys are leadership litmus tests. It's a how well is our leadership doing? Organizations with highly engaged employees have increased shareholder returns, decreased turnover. It's important to understand what the drivers are and how our organizations and us as local leaders can pull the levers. Working in a culture that supports engagement is lovely. And why not try to come to work and feel good about where you work? We spend enough time at work. So it is important to understand and know what the low-hanging fruit is in your department or your organization. So before we start talking about engagement, it's a lot easier to start with disengagement. It's very easy to recognize disengagement. It's when people withdraw. They remove their personal energies. You can see this when people become robotic at work, apathetic, detached. They're burnt out. When people disengage, they become defensive. They hide their true identity, their true thoughts, their feelings. They're going through the emotions of work, but they don't give themselves into their work. They're driven more of what they have to do than more of what they want to do. I can give numerous examples of this. The one that comes most to mind is when I have to call a company's customer service line. I'm thinking of a specific airline right now that has a hub in Miami. They seem annoyed that I've called. Well, if I can't even find the phone number, first of all, it's hidden. They want you to do the chat or they want you to email. So if I find the phone number and I wait 2 hours and somebody answers, they're not happy that I've called. They're bothered by my questions. They definitely seem annoyed. They sound miserable because they are miserable. This is a management issue. This is a leadership issue. It almost always is. But these concepts and the problems that the people on the other line are facing extend everywhere. It could be education. It could be healthcare. It could be any industry. These are themes that apply everywhere. As we're going through here, we're going to talk about leadership and local leadership, and that's us. Even if you don't have a formal title, you're still a local leader of your team in the operating room, or your team in the PACU, or your team in pre-op. All right, now engagement. We're going to just review quickly 2 definitions that I really like. The first one, an individual's sense of purpose and focused energy, evident to others in the display of personal initiative, adaptability, effort, and persistence toward organizational goals. One more. The employment and expression of a person's preferred self. People who are engaged keep their selves within a role without sacrificing one for another. So you're the same person at work as you are at home, as you are with your friends, as you are on vacation. Okay. So this is the doctor that is totally absorbed. He or she is mindful of their work. They say things like, it doesn't feel like work when you love what you do. They have high levels of intrinsic motivation. So they're performing because it's personally rewarding to them. That motivation is coming from within. Contrast this to external motivation, where you're completing a task or you're having a behavior because you're going to receive a reward or avoid punishment. That motivation is coming from the outside. Engaged people tend to be very focused because they want to do the things that they're doing. And they take initiative to make sure they go well because they genuinely care. They do not see work as a burden because it's an important part of their identity. But it's because they're doing what they want to do. And we'll talk more about how to get to that point. So just one quick divergence here. How is this related to satisfaction and how is it different? So these are 2 similar constructs, but they have different drivers. So engagement is striving, seeking with passion. And satisfaction is how content people are with their work arrangement. So I'll give you an example. I am sure you can think of a colleague who is great at his job, loves his job, well paid, great benefits, maybe has a low call burden, highly regarded amongst his peers. This person would have high job satisfaction. This person, though, may also be that same person that when he sees something not working in his environment, maybe it's a relationship communication, maybe it's a workflow, maybe it's simply equipment failure, He ignores it. He doesn't report it. He doesn't try to fix it, doesn't work on it, doesn't get involved. This person may also not be interested in teaching or improving quality or setting up any systems to improve workflows or any of those other things. Generally thinks all of that stuff is not his job. People like this say, I don't know, I just work here. I'll give you another example. This is from a course I took on this topic. You fall in love and you want to marry your partner. You buy him, her, they a ring. If it were a satisfaction ring, it would mean that you are happy and content with the current arrangement and you would like to express that. However, if it's an engagement ring, you are saying something very different. You are saying that you are investing in the future of the relationship because you believe in that relationship and you will do whatever it takes to keep that relationship strong. So, related constructs, but only engagement predicts employee performance because it's engagement that refers to the psychological and behavioral energy associated with the work. And it's that energy that yields performance, not the employee satisfaction. And so if you wanted to, so satisfaction is more, remember how people feel about the organization and what the organization does for them, but that's not engagement. So if you wanted to change satisfaction, that's hard to do because you need like C-suite level or corporate or high-level initiatives to change that agreement or those conditions. But the great news is that engagement is largely determined by local leadership, and that's us. Whether you have a title or not, that's us. Local leadership can drive engagement and drive performance. Okay, another poll. Reflect on the most exceptional leader you've ever had the privilege to work with. What qualities made them an outstanding person to work for? Okay, just read some of those. Interacts and listens. Servant leader, yes, I agree. Servant leader. So just since that one's so big, so maybe it only got 2, but everyone else was 1. But so a servant leader subscribes to the type of leadership style where he or she believes that it's their job to remove obstacles and put in place systems that work for people, that will get to know their colleagues, the people that they serve, and find out what they need to succeed and where they want to go and provide opportunities or look for opportunities to place them there. They're not leading from the front, they're leading from the back, and they're removing all obstacles and streamlining things so that people can come to work and not have to reinvent the wheel every minute. They can actually rise to a higher level of thinking and problem solving because all that other stuff is taken care of. And supportive is a big one here. Okay, so think about that person and think about what qualities they had as we go through the rest of this. Okay, what are the drivers of engagement? They can be broken down into 3 buckets. Psychological meaningfulness, that's having the reason to be engaged. Psychological safety, having the freedom and safety to engage. And psychological availability, having the capacity to engage. We're going to dive deeper into each one of those. Okay, psychological meaningfulness. Think about, as you're reading this slide, think about these questions. How meaningful or rewarding is the work itself? Is there variety, challenge, significance, clarity associated with the tasks and the expectations? And how is the level of fit with your knowledge or your colleagues' knowledge, skills, and the abilities and the demands of the job? So in order to really satisfy those first 3 that I spoke of, the leader must really know their colleagues, what they want, where they want to be, where they want to be in 1 year, 5 years, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. This truly goes beyond, knowing where they live, knowing their spouse's name, what their spouse does for a living, their kids' names, really truly knowing them, what drives them, what do they want out of their work life, what is meaningful to them, what don't they want, what are they good at, maybe insights that they don't even have themselves. So along the lines also of psychological meaningfulness, it's Do employees have opportunities to make decisions that impact the way the job is done? And what about input into decisions that impact the broader organization? Is there engagement there? Do they have a say? Do people give you feedback, or are you giving people feedback? Not just to say what they could do differently, but what are they doing well, and what should they continue doing? Or should they be redirecting their energy somewhere else? What is the quality of the interactions amongst coworkers and peers? Do people share information? They work well with each other? Do they help each other? Or do they insulate themselves from each other and from management? Bottom line on this one, if you give people challenging and meaningful work, you set them up for success, and they will reciprocate by pouring themselves into their work. Okay, next lever here, psychological availability. This one's pretty straightforward. Are employees under significant levels of stress? Is there understaffing? Difficult working conditions? Are there any significant sources of frustration or anxiety that may cause emotional exhaustion among employees? I think that's like everything that an anesthesiologist has. What about non-work needs? Is there flexibility whenever possible? Are managers, coworkers sympathetic to the challenges associated with juggling multiple roles in personal and professional life? Can you go to the doctor if you need to? Just something simple like that. Are there development opportunities, mentoring, coaching? Is there meaningful feedback? Again, feedback is not just do this differently or you're doing this wrong. It's what are you doing right? What should I keep doing? What am I good at? Okay, last one, and I think this one is the most important, and it's the psychological safety one. Do people feel safe in expressing their views? Are there risks associated with taking initiative or disagreeing? Can people rely on being treated fairly? Do certain employees have some privileges that others don't? Does the manager play favorites? Do managers' actions align with their words? Do they do what they say they will do? Are some employees working against negative or erroneous stereotypes? Is there bias? Is there microaggressions? Is there a norm for people to be open to learning? Especially, this is the tricky part, from mistakes and each other. All right, so bottom line for this one is people need to feel supported by management and psychologically safe to engage. They can't feel that they're vulnerable in the face of management. They need to be able to bring their full selves, their true selves. Remember, one of the definitions was bringing your true self and being the same person you are at home and at work without having risk of doing that. So this is a super busy slide. I'm just going to point out a couple things to think about with inclusivity. So people have to be insiders. There can't be in-group and out-groups in the department or in that local area that you belong. Inclusion has to come from leaders and managers. It's in their speech, how they run their meeting, in their actions, what they praise, what they correct, publicly especially. But some of my favorites, if you're thinking about this, are who assumes the role of speaking for the group more often than others? Are they the team members who get interrupted or talked over? Who is getting talked over? Who is being interrupted? Who gets the privilege of interrupting or not being interrupted? What factors in your team cause people to hold back and choose to be silent? Okay, a few take-home points. Satisfaction and engagement are different. You can be satisfied but not engaged. Local leaders can impact engagement. Psychological meaningfulness, safety, availability. By knowing what your employees are, what they're good at, what they're not good at. Putting people where their strengths are heightened and not putting them where their negatives or their weaknesses are focused on. The follow-up to this talk would be what to do about it, how to do a needs assessment, like a gap analysis, how to make an action plan, how to figure out where those initial low-hanging fruit, those initial wins would be. Thank you all. Those are my references.
Thank you, Dr. Maga. Our next speaker is Dr. George Machasku. Dr. Machasku is board-certified practicing pediatric cardiac anesthesiologist with nearly 30 years of experience, having completed medical school at Kansas City College of Osteopathic Medicine and anesthesiology residency and fellowships at the Yale University School of Medicine. He currently serves as professor and vice chair of anesthesiology at the LSU School of Medicine, Shreveport, Louisiana, and is director of perioperative services at the Ochsner LSU Academic Medical Center. Dr. Machasku has been awarded by the AOCA as this year's CM Esterline Lecturer. The CM Esterline is awarded annually to an exceptional lecturer who has made outstanding accomplishments in advancing the science and art of osteopathic medicine and education. Dr. Machasku's lecture on operational efficiency meets the expectations of this honor, and we look forward to hearing his presentation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Machasku.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to the Society for inviting me and honoring me with the Esterline. It was quite a surprise, and I very much appreciate this. Well, I hope to not bore you too much. Anybody who's been in anesthesia practice for more than a minute, I'm sure, has been monitored by somebody holding a clipboard in the corner of the operating room and a stopwatch and looking at different times and reducing patient care to different metrics, as they like to call it. So I'll hopefully give you some tips and hints to try and deal with these things that sort of get in our way of really doing what we do, which is patient care, right? We're not necessarily trained to be production assembly line operators. I'm also a little bit threatened because they say the most dangerous place to be is between somebody and their lunch, and now I'm between somebody, their lunch, and going home too. So I don't have any conflicts of interest, unfortunately, but I have done a lot of work in the distant past with Baxter, and I have a hobby of beating up on sevoflurane and pushing desflurane, so you'll find a clear bias there, but I did a lot of work with the drug in its early development with Ted Eager. So I think I'll give you some hints and tips there as well. So today we want to just discuss the challenges that we're facing in the perioperative space and just define the basic metrics so you'll understand the language that the pencil-pushing administrators in the C-suite are using when they evaluate your practice. We'll look at the Toyota production system and continuous improvement. If you haven't heard about that, you probably will. It's sort of all the rage and the buzzword in healthcare nowadays. They're applying industrial processes that work very well in car production plants to the human operation of a hospital. And I can show you some of the pitfalls, but some of the promises with that too. And then we'll look at a couple of anesthetic techniques that affect efficiency. It's interesting, a lot of our paradigms that apply to perioperative care and efficiency, like the EROS protocols, treat anesthesia as a black box because they were written by non-anesthesiologists, right? So to them, anesthesia is just anesthesia. So we do a million things before and after surgery, and then they have anesthesia. But it's that anesthesia box that affects outcomes more than anything. Well, some of the basic definitions that the administrators look at are waste and cost, right? And we all sort of have an intrinsic idea about this. Waste being spending that can be eliminated without reducing the quality of care. And every hospital, every institution does wasteful things that seem kind of crazy, but if you're not there, I mean, if you're an insider, you don't really see it. Because people find workarounds and take extra steps to deal with the paradigm or the culture of an institution. So when I took over as chair of the department at Drexel many years ago, it was a very troubled department. And they did a lot of wasteful, kind of crazy workarounds. And I'm sure anybody who, like, if you've ever been in that situation, coming into a new place and you look at the environment and you ask, why do you do this? This doesn't make any sense. You always hear the same three things. Well, we're different from everybody else. This works for us, and you're not from here, so you wouldn't understand. And I will tell you that waste is waste. It really doesn't matter where you're at. And then cost containment, the efforts to control the high rate and total costs. And you'll see that some cost containment is actually wasteful. And it can impact quality of care depending on the situation you're in. There's one well-known, large, publicly held hospital system in the United States about 2-3 years ago. Their stock price was around $50 a share. Today, their stock price is around $1.98 a share. And they've done all this accomplishment by simply cutting costs. And you can only cut costs so much until you start impacting the quality of care and patient satisfaction. So why not do business as usual? Why care about this, right? I mean, we can always fake some metrics and make the administrators happy. Why should we really care? Well, the demographics in America are changing, right? The silver tsunami is really hitting us now in full force. The first baby boomers retired, about a decade ago, give or take. And that's starting to really hit with this increase in the number of elderly patients that need a lot of medical care. Reimbursement continues to decrease. We talked about just cutting costs and reimbursement, and the government is always very good at trying to find ways to not pay you for what you do. Anesthesia services cost a lot. The market right now is almost unsustainable. I live in the healthcare desert in Shreveport. If anybody wants to come to work in Shreveport, see me, and I'll put you on call next Saturday. We're having to pay our CRNAs $250 an hour to find CRNAs. Our new residents, green residents that are still sort of wet behind the ears, are being offered $600,000 a year to work out in town. And we can't find people. So the cost is almost unsustainable. We have very decreased availability of qualified staff. When there's a kid in Shreveport that has a history of congenital heart disease that needs an MRI, I'll get letters from scheduling about, well, when are you around? Because this kid needs an MRI. This is a town of 175,000 people, and we're one cell layer thick as far as our specialty and subspecialty coverage. COVID burnout is a real thing. People are reducing their work schedules. They are not engaged, right? The post-COVID era, people that are still here are really not engaged. There's a lot of quiet, silent quitting going on. And then, of course, there's a medical arms race. Every hospital doesn't want to be caught in the robot gap, right? Remember that scene in Dr. Strangelove where George C. Scott was? We didn't want to be caught in the mine shaft gap. Well, now every hospital administrator doesn't want to be caught in a robot gap. And we see newspaper stories about the first surgeon in Shreveport doing the first robotic craniectomy or the first robotic transoral surgery. And I'm like, how do you fit a robot in the mouth? But I digress. So you see here, this is just simply the American demographic right now. And we are right about here. So this great increase in the number of elderly patients is taking off. At the same time, these people are living longer. So not only are we seeing a lot more elderly patients, we're doing a very good job of keeping them alive longer. So they need a lot of care, a lot of intervention at a time in history when we have a record shortage of supply of healthcare professionals. So this is really important. And these are not healthy people, as I said. You see that the incidence of hypertension, renal insufficiency, all these conditions are very prominent. So these people need a lot of intensive medical intervention. At the same time, the American demographic is changing. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist by training, and I kind of liked that when I was working in Mississippi because sometimes the kids were smaller than me, not always. Every day now we're doing kids that are over 100 kilos. My record is a 10-year-old that weighed 400 pounds for tonsillectomy. And that's becoming routine, right? This is a big country just like I am. Now I know that none of you here ever take care of any large and overweight patients, but just humor me, I suppose. And COVID burnout, again, is a real thing. We see a lot of people taking early retirement. We see a lot of people disengaged, quietly quitting, right? I mean, the talk about engagement was very timely, but it's very hard to fix that. I've had faculty in my office within the last week, just looking at the floor saying, I just can't anymore. I'm done. I can't, no matter, I said, what can I do? How can I change your work schedule? What can I do to help you because you're a valuable and important member? And they're dug so far into the hole that they can't see out anymore. And this is increasingly common. Again, I said there's unsustainable salary inflation. There's a shortage of all types of anesthesia personnel. The national CRNA unemployment rate is 0.2%. The only CRNAs who aren't working are the ones who don't want to work. There just aren't any. In our academic medical center, 30% of our cases are done under QZ modifier in a state that's not an opt-out state. And that's not uncommon. Up the street in Texarkana, Arkansas, which is, again, not an opt-out state, they're doing supervision ratios of 14-1 in their hospital. So when we had a faculty join us a couple of years ago from them, and he realized we were usually 4-1, sometimes 6-1, he thought it was like being on vacation. So there's numerous reimbursement and payer issues. Again, they're always looking for ways to decrease pay for what we're doing. We talk a lot, there's a lot of things, value-based care, outcome satisfaction measurements, all these polls. And if you're working in a charity hospital, if you're working in a safety net hospital, if you're working in a quaternary care medical center in Shreveport, Louisiana, then you have a lot of challenges because that is not a good hotel experience for patients, right? And patients don't really know that a surgeon did an excellent anastomosis of their left anterior descending artery. Patients don't really know that you did an excellent job putting in an arterial line and doing a careful, safe anesthetic. They know that they're in a noisy holding area. They know the floor was dirty. They know the nurses were pulling their hair out because they were short-staffed. And then they get a bad CMS satisfaction survey. And we're just looking for ways to deal with that every day. So these are all important issues, and why should we care? Because if we care about this and address these issues, it gives us more time and ability to actually do what we want to do, what we like to do, which is caring for patients, providing anesthesia care for patients. Now, when the pointy-headed administrators are on their clipboards and measuring what you're doing in the operating room, there's some basic metrics that they all look at. And a lot of it is on-time start. Did you start on time? And there's sort of a circle of blame in an operating room, right? You saw that movie years ago that talked about a circle of trust. Well, in the operating room, there's a circle of blame. Whose fault is it that we didn't start on time? And usually it's pointing towards anesthesia, but there's multiple factors, right? Patients show up late, surgeons don't have their consents done, their H&P is not done, and I work in a resident-run hospital on the surgery side, and if the attending surgeons are not engaged, that multiplies those factors as well. But these are the basic things they're going to measure with us. Start time. On-time start is defined usually in most systems as wheels in the room. And the surgeons don't understand that, right? They're like, we didn't start on time, because surgeons are thinking cut time. But cut time is different than on-time start, and cut time is very hard to measure because there's a variability from time in the room to cut time. So to make the record keeping easy, we define start time as time in the room for the most part. Now, there may be some definitions or some metrics that are harder to capture, caring for the patient in the pre-op area, lines, things like that. But in general, to make the math easy, time in the room. In-room to procedure start is another metric that people measure. You might be surprised to learn that the University Hospitals Consortium defines the national gold standard of in-room to cut time as 15 minutes. That seems a little weird, right? That seems pretty fast. And the reason that seems fast is you have ENT cases, tubes and tonsils mixing with cabbages and hips. So it all averages out to 15 minutes. I still doubt that metric a little bit, but that's consistently reported. I can tell you in my institution, that's not anywhere close, right? Another metric is procedure to end surgery done to out of room time. And that's, again, anesthesia gets a lot of fingers pointed sometimes, right? Well, It's taken anesthesia forever to wake this patient up. And surgeons don't know, right? Surgeons finish their last few sutures, or even worse, they leave after the critical parts are done and they let the surgery residents and medical students close. And then they're in the lounge wondering, why is it taking so long for anesthesia to get my next case started? Because they don't realize, well, it took the medical student 45 minutes to close, and then we had to go to the PACU, but the PACU was on hold because the hospital's backed up, and they don't see all this. Turnover time, wheels out to wheels in. Pretty easy metric to measure, right? And everybody focuses on turnover time. Utilization, simply what percentage of time was a patient in the operating room for a defined standard block. After hours, out of block time, it's again pretty easy to define. And what percentage of your cases are add-ons? We all believe that a lot of add-ons are a bad thing, and they are because they're very inefficient. The medical workup is not always good, and you're trying to play catch-up to get a very sick patient safely through a surgery. And right now, I think our percentage of add-ons running about 35 to 40%. So again, that varies with your institution, right? A trauma center will have a lot more add-ons than Man's Best Hospital with a lot of healthy patients with good insurance. So a lot of people look at ways to fix the operating room. How do we fix this? What incentives can we do? What systems? And people have focused a lot on the Toyota production system. And it's gotten a lot of attention in healthcare, and we'll talk about that more. But also the ASA has been pushing the concept of the perioperative surgical home. And this is kind of an osteopathic concept, isn't it? And this is the statement from the ASA, and you can read probably better than I can. But we know that if a patient is medically optimized, has a good anesthetic, then medically optimized post-op, that should be a more efficient and cost-effective method of care. And the best person to do that is the anesthesiologist, right? I think we understand perioperative medicine better than anybody else. I mean, I'm sure you've had the same frustration when you have a question, you ask a cardiologist a specific question, you get back some sort of silly nonsense answer, and you think to yourself, do they actually pay you to do this? We should be doing this. I think the ASA is right. The anesthesiologist is the best positioned individual to run the perioperative surgical home. The problem is nobody reimburses for this. Nobody has the patients for it. Nobody has the staffing for it. So this is a great concept, but people are incentivized, systems are incentivized by what they're getting reimbursed for. And this has not really gone anywhere because of that. So how does this all work? It's partnering with hospitals to maximize efficiency of care. It decreases the number of perioperative tests. I mean, how many of you work in systems, and I'm sure it's probably the majority of the room, where you have some surgeon that orders a serum porcelain level because at one time in his or her career, they had a patient that had abnormal serum porcelain level, and they were surprised by it. And we still have surgeons that order a chest x-ray routinely on every single patient they do because I don't want anesthesia to cancel my case. Right? It's interesting, we all went to medical school, I'm pretty sure we all did, in anesthesia and surgery, and then once they become surgeons, they forget their doctors. Like, why are you getting all these tests? Oh, well, so you guys don't cancel my case. Well, okay. Did you notice that this sodium was 123? Did that bother you at all? No, I got the test. So, yeah, so this is the ideal world, how it works. So you hear a lot about the Toyota production system. And we know that 90% of processes add no value. As I said, every hospital does things just because. So they tried to take lessons from the Toyota production system, and that was a method, and I don't want to get into continuous improvement and Toyota production in a lot of detail, but if you've ever gone that rabbit hole, it's very, very fascinating how Toyota can produce a lot of cars with a high degree of safety and reliability. The problem is these are industrial processes, right? These aren't human beings, and surgeons with variable abilities and times and anesthesiologists with variable times. But again, in general, the Toyota production system is a way of looking at perioperative processes to decrease processes that add no value, things that you do that make no sense, but you do it because that's how your hospital has always done things. So you want to avoid unnecessary work. You want to avoid patient delay and inconvenience, medical errors, too much inventory, right? How many of us keep 2 weeks worth of supplies in an anesthesia cart because it's hard to find inventory, it's hard to get things restocked, and we spend a lot of time with excess amounts of junk in the anesthesia carts. Inefficient utilization of personnel, space, poor customer satisfaction. So these are all what you're trying to eliminate. And you have to engage your stakeholders. Hospital financing is a big stakeholder. Does this make sense to a hospital? I was involved with the startup of the Nemours Children's Hospital in Orlando, a $400 million project of the AI DuPont Charitable Trust. And the way they looked at costs were very different than the way, for instance, CHA would look at costs in a hospital in the Space Coast in Florida, right? So every year, the DuPont Charitable Trust cuts their hospitals a check for $125 million out of the trust. So it's a very different way of cost, and they're very patient-focused, very parent and child-focused, and they're doing things differently. But they also built that hospital from the ground up, from the back of the napkin stage in the Toyota production system, and how to be the most efficient. We had the speaker, I think Dr. Hanyadi, earlier in the meeting from Seattle Children's. They were one of the first pioneers in Toyota production system continuous improvement of your processes. And of course, we know all the other stakeholders. Pharmacy and materials management are big stakeholders. Pharmacists are very good at line item discussions of things, and we'll get to that more in a little bit. So this all starts with mapping how your OR flows, what processes go through. And these, you see, this slide's a little busy, but these are all timed processes, right? How many times does it what's the time that it takes for a patient to come into pre-op, to get checked in, for nursing to do their assessment, for vital signs. And the first step is kind of mapping all that out. And when you map all that out, you see how much time is taken, what steps are you wasteful. And it's very important to engage people that actually do the work. Interesting story, when I was at Hahnemann, the hospital administrators didn't really understand what we did. They were a tenant-run hospital, was very disconnected from the daily work, and the CEO was, well, whatever you guys do down there in the operating room. To them, a cabbage or a ruptured aneurysm was the same as a hernia, was the same as a cath lab case. They just really didn't understand, and their paradigm was more cases better, more cases better. Well, you know, this surgeon takes 12 hours to do an elbow that's on Medicaid, and she wants to start at 1 in the afternoon because she got something to do all morning. More cases better. You have to do it. That was their paradigm. The surgeon wants to do a case anytime, any day, no questions. So Hahnemann Hospital was the largest bankruptcy of an academic medical center in the history of the United States, and was totally predictable. So you see here in this OR flow mapping that this is all pre-op stuff, and they're looking at this in detail. And the Toyota production system, at least if you're building cars, you have a standard work, and these are putting one piece on another. Well, maybe our standard work is anesthetizing a patient for an appendectomy or an elective chole, so that's your standard work. And the takt times you'll hear talked about, that's the most important metric here, is how often your patient gets to the recovery room. What is the interval between patients? So I'm going to propose to you that the most important metric in perioperative services that people don't really talk about is not how long it takes to get to the OR, not how long it takes to get to the PACU. The most important metric is predictability. A killer for efficiency is an unpredictable process. And see, we already have unpredictable processes, right? Because we have surgeons that are unpredictable, right? How many of us say, oh, it'll be another 45 minutes? Well, you told me that 3 hours ago, right? Or I'll be another 45 minutes and 2 minutes later, done. Okay, so that's unpredictable. Patients are unpredictable, right? Taking care of somebody like me for a gallbladder is going to be different than taking care of a young, healthy, skinny kid for an appendectomy. So patients are unpredictable. Processes are unpredictable, so we need to, as much as possible, home in on a predictable time interval, because some things we can't control. It's harder to control surgeons, it's harder to control patients, but some things we can control. Part of what is important to control is surgery schedule leveling. I mean, I'm sure we've all worked in operating rooms where you were working late and doing a crazy amount of cases on Monday and Tuesday, and on Thursday and Friday there's nothing. Right? Actually, I have the weird inverse in where I'm at. Thursday and Friday get crazy busy because we have practitioners from the private community in town that are doing their private patients earlier in the week and the Medicaid charity patients later in the week. So our Fridays get crazy busy. And the problem is, it's very hard to staff for that, right? If you're doing a lot of cases on Monday and nothing on Tuesday, it's hard to hire people that only want to work Monday and then not on Tuesday, but then you need them again on Wednesday, or maybe some alternate Thursdays when the surgeon's in town. So again, you need buy-in for the stakeholders. And leveling surgery schedule is important. You see, this is from Yakima Valley Hospital, and there's a third-party payer or company they use there to do continuous improvement. And they were worried about the room turnover time. And you see what their problem is here? It's variability. They couldn't predict what their turnover time was. So they did a 100-day process and what they called a rapid change trial. And they changed things, and after 100 days, they instituted all these measures, and they considered themselves successful because you see their variability decreased. They were hitting their turnover times more accurately, they could schedule more accurately, and decrease waste, have increased revenue. So again, variability is important. And I talked about the anesthesia black box, right? To non-anesthesiologists, anesthesia is all the same, but these things are not all the same. These things are all different, right? A volatile anesthetic, and each volatile anesthetic is different than a regional, different than a TIVA. So what's our ideal anesthetic? Our ideal anesthetic is a light switch, on, off. Well, how do we accomplish that? Can we accomplish that? Right? Because if we had a light switch, you could eliminate all that variability, at least to a degree. Well, we all know this slide, right? Here's the history of anesthesia. And through the years, our volatile agents, and in the United States, most anesthetics, or most general anesthetics, are based in using volatile agents to some degree. 15 or 20 years ago, Paul White said that today 100% of our anesthetics would be TIVAs, and the whole country would be on TIVA. And we've actually gone the opposite direction, right? We're not on TIVA. Europe, which has a very different culture of care, different availability of targeted infusion pumps, is mostly TIVA. We're not in Europe. So you see halothane, very insoluble or very soluble, and through the years we became less and less soluble. You see here, sevoflurane and desflurane have very low blood gas partition coefficients, right? Very insoluble. So if that's the case, I'm going to propose to you that one drug is very different from the other, because they don't show you this slide here. While the blood gas partition coefficients of sevo and desflurane are very similar, you see the tissue blood partition coefficients are very different. So sevoflurane is much more soluble in all the tissues of the body outside of the blood than desflurane. So once sevoflurane leaves the blood, and it leaves the blood slowly, right? Because I said it's not a very soluble drug. But once it does, it slowly enters these tissues, and then it slowly goes away. So again, I know you never take care of any fat people, but if you did, you see that sevoflurane has almost the same fat solubility as halothane. And a very poorly vascularized tissue, sevo will enter the fat slowly and leave very slowly. So what's the consequence of that? Well, terminal decrement is a funny concept, but it's the amount of time that it takes to eliminate the volatile agent versus duration of anesthesia. So take a look at this. This is pretty interesting. You can see that because of its tissue solubilities, for a very short case, sevoflurane looks a lot like desflurane, and it's better than enflurane or isoflurane because it's blood solubility for the most part in play. But look what happens if your case gets longer. Sevoflurane starts turning into isoflurane, starts turning into enflurane. So if you do a long, 3-4 hour case, it takes almost an hour to eliminate your sevoflurane, 90% of the dose anyway. Desflurane, on the other hand, has mathematically a flatline relationship. What does that mean? That means that mathematically, you can do a case of infinite duration. We have a general surgeon in Shreveport that does cases of infinite duration. And you can do a case of infinite duration and still have the same 5-minute, 90% elimination time because it's not accumulated in the tissues to that degree. Now, the University of California, San Francisco does some pretty crazy studies. They did a pretty interesting study many years ago, and they looked at immediate recovery and swallowing. And they looked at time for ability to swallow in the PACU. So they did a standard case, took the patient to the PACU, waited 2 minutes, and then took a 20 cc syringe of water and shot it into the patient's mouth to see if they could swallow. Right? Pretty mad science, but San Francisco. Right? You can see, and swallowing is a very complicated neurologic reflex. Swallowing is suppressed by as little as a 12th MAC of anesthesia. So you can see that 2 minutes after entering the PACU, patients that had sevoflurane, only 40-odd% of them could swallow the water bolus. The rest of them coughed, sputtered, had laryngospasm, did what patients normally do when you put a bunch of water in their mouth in the PACU. Now the patients had desflurane, almost 100% swallowed. Well, that wasn't good enough, so they waited 4 more minutes and they did it again. Now, by 6 minutes into the PACU, 80-some-odd% of the patients with SIBO swallowed, and if, as you expect, the patients that swallowed with desflurane swallowed again before. So that showed that the sevoflurane was just persisting longer and affecting patients. And these patients nowadays live in the coffin corner, right? What's the coffin corner of anesthesia? The coffin corner is when you have the fattest patient you've ever seen being cared for by the slowest surgeon in your operating room, by the worst anesthesia resident you've ever seen, in the operating room that's the farthest from the PACU. Right? So these are all these risk-added qualifiers that affect a patient in the first few minutes after surgery. So the faster a patient is awake, the more predictably a patient is awake, the safer they are. And you can see this was manifested when they looked at time from anesthetic discontinuation. This is sensitive. Time from anesthetic discontinuation to ability to swallow. You can see here, patients on desflurane, they all clumped right in here, right? So regardless of their MAC hours, it all took them about the same amount of time to swallow. And again, that's that flat line that we mentioned. But look at the patients on SIVO. Not only did they have this increasing slope relationship, so the longer the case went, the longer it took them to swallow, I don't really see a line here, right? I mean, the computer sees a line, but I don't see a line. I see a bunch of dots. I see the back of a stop sign in Mississippi. So what that tells me is, see, stop that. You can have a patient that swallows in this amount of time after sevoflurane anesthetic or in this amount of time. It's all over the board. It's like a light switch that you flick on, and sometimes the light comes on right away. Sometimes it waits 5 minutes, sometimes it waits 10 minutes, sometimes it's 2 seconds. It's completely unpredictable. And that's really the qualitative difference there. And this was just measuring time to, the slide doesn't come out that great, but time for first swallowing versus age. And you can see here, not surprisingly, that older people take longer to regain their swallowing, wake up. But again, you can see this is a flat line. There's no variability here. Whereas again, with SIVO, it's the back of the stop sign, right? It's just a scattergram. So in conclusion, what's important is not the cost of what we're doing. Pharmacists are really good at telling us the cost. It's the value, right? Is it worth what we're spending? And does this make sense in patient care? If we can move a patient more quickly and safely through the operating room, that makes sense. It gives us more time to do our job and to care for these patients. I have a call from the system down at its headquarters in New Orleans about once a month. And they'll call me and they'll say, well, you guys are using too much Cigamodex. And I'll be like, okay. Well, it's a real expensive drug. Okay. Well, you need to use less. No. But it costs a lot. Okay. And it's adding value, right? Because this is a drug that makes our care safer. Well, a lot of people are using it. It's costing a lot. I'm like, do you think there's a reason for that? And, well, you have to come up with a protocol for how you're going to use it. I'm like, okay. We won't use it on anybody who's allergic to it. Is that good? And finally, I usually conclude the conversation with, I tell you what, when you tell surgeons they can no longer do 10-hour robotic ventral hernia repairs, then we can have the discussion about Cigamodex. Until then, I'll talk to you next month. But pharmacists are really good at line item costs. You know, and Baxter with Desfrane battled this for years and years because Desfrane cost $20 more a bottle than sevoflurane, and it was, you would think the world was coming to an end. So that way, if you used isoflurane instead of desflurane on a 10-hour operation, you could save as much as $100. But that's how pharmacists understand value, right? It's simply a line item cost. Of course, today people are beating up on desflurane because of this crazy misguided notion about global warming, which, don't get me started. It's just, you know, you would think scientists would have a more logical approach to this. Questions, comments? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Machaska, for that presentation. We're now going to begin the Q&A portion. Just as we're maybe making your way to the microphone, please, if you would like to have a question, I'd like to ask you a question on talking about changing processes and the importance of communication in that. And I'll just tell a quick story. At one of our largest hospitals in Las Vegas, it's an HCA hospital. HCA, it's a 30 OR hospital. The HCA nationally was measuring this ERAS implementation, and we got a brand new CMO come into the hospital with this like, we're going to increase our numbers. We're only at 10% compliance. We're going to make this 100%, and it's up to you, anesthesia. And we're like, well, you know, the portion that, you know, so much of this is due to the surgeons, and before they ever come to us, no, we're going to make this happen. This is how it's going to happen. Everybody's going to get PO Tylenol because it's cheaper, and Zofran. Okay, we show up day one. None of the ORs are starting on time, and everybody's going, what is going on? We call pharmacy. What's the problem? Why is everybody getting Tylenol today? They had no clue. And the Pyxis weren't stored with the Tylenol, and the nurses couldn't get Tylenol because it has to be approved, you know, it's got to be stocked, number one, and then, of course, so you order it, doesn't matter. Total lack of communication, right? But the CMO put it on our backs that we're going to do this without setting up a process to make it happen.
Pharmacy is great at getting in the way of patient care. We get that all the time. Oh, you know, IV Tylenol is very, very expensive. Like, and then the EROS is a whole nother thing. In anesthesia, we used to call that, in the 80s, we called that garbage anesthesia, right? When you gave a little bit of a million different drugs to accomplish your goal. Now with EROS, you're giving 100 drugs or 100 things that don't necessarily do much impacting anesthesia. So we're going to give 2 gallons of Gatorade 3 hours before surgery, and then we'll give gabapentin, even though the studies show that it does nothing except sedate patients unnecessarily. Again, it's all created by non-anesthesiologists looking for some sort of a metric for the hospital's next 6 months quarterly reports, but it doesn't add to the value of care.
Any questions for?
Thank you both. It was a great panel and a great 2 lectures. I enjoyed it very much. Dr. Maga, I know you pretty well. We've worked together for 8 years now, or maybe even a little more. And I know that you have worn a lot of hats. You're a great clinical anesthesiologist. I know not to use the word but, because we were told you're supposed to say end after you make a comment like that, so end. You've done a lot outside of the operating room, and we had a wonderful discussion by Dr. David Ninen, who talked about alternative career paths, and a lot of your other hats have been outside of the operating room. I won't go through all of them, there's too many to name, but you were chief of a very big anesthesia group at a university hospital. You transitioned into medical directorship roles, and now you're working with the medical school. Can you just talk a little bit about how you created those opportunities for yourself, your engagement through those transitions, and if it's brought you more happiness or less happiness? If you could just talk about that a little bit.
That last line.
Thank you, Dr. Fabro. So the way I have approached my career is I just try to keep an open mind, and if I see an opportunity, I look at it and I think, does this help me meet my goals? And I try to have a vision, and my vision has changed. When I graduated residency in 2006, and I wanted to do the biggest, the longest, the most hardest cases, traumas. I wanted to do the 2 a.m. trauma. I did hearts, I did NICU, babies, and that's what, and so any opportunity where I could do that, I did. And then about 5 years into it, I thought, wow, okay, well, I'm doing all this. What else? I don't know if this is sustainable for the next 30 years. So my mind, I shifted, and I thought, okay, I'd like to, set up more systems. I'd like to improve quality. I'd like to move the levers more in a different way than one-on-one with the patient. So I started kind of like elevating my look and seeing what could be done. And honestly, I just started to improve things. And about that time, I also moved from Cleveland to Miami. And I just happened to be put in a hospital that was just opening. Well, it wasn't opening. It was a new takeover for UM. And I came with that lens of what could be better, what could be better. And as I started improving things, I started to gather titles. It wasn't the goal to get the titles, the goal was to improve, but then I needed the title to do the improvement, so I took them because I needed the validation, I needed people to listen to me, so I needed some arbitrary title. And then I did that for about 6 or 7 years, and I met some significant political pushback where no longer did people want to improve, or I guess the people above me didn't want to improve anymore, at least in the ideas that I thought. And so I wasn't really making any headway. I would bring control charts, like you have said, and many of the things that you have said, I'm like, wow, do you work at the University of Miami? And I would bring them, and it was like, well, thank you, but we're not going to do that. So it was kind of banging my head up against the wall. So at that point, an opportunity came in my email about a new curriculum at the medical school, and there was a role. They were looking for 25 physicians to be this longitudinal clinical educator, and I didn't see I was an educator. I taught residents, I taught medical students, but I had never been part of that, and so I thought, okay, and I pivoted. So I don't know if I created the opportunities, but I just keep my eyes open, and I think of what my goals are at that moment in that stage of my life, and I just evaluate. And if it fits, I look into it. If it doesn't fit, I move on. The only other thing I can add is in the very beginning of my career, I used to feel really bad if I missed any opportunity. I was like a opportunity like Pac-Man. And now I'm not. I say, okay, no, that looks like amazing and really fun, and that would be great for my career, and that would be very prestigious. But now I say, wait a minute, that doesn't fit my career goals now, and I say, no, thank you. And that was a hard transition to do, but and that allowed more time and bandwidth for things that really did fit my goals. Dr. Fabro, I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
If you have the time, the ACOM's and AOA's Health Policy Fellowship is a really good program that expands your horizons. I got interested in that in the mid-2000s, just looking at federal health policy and the way the healthcare system works or doesn't work. And it was probably one of the best learning experiences of my career. And it's a great service of ACOM and led me to end up starting 7 medical schools in the U.S.
One of the things you talk about efficiency, I was the chairman of our department for probably 10 years at a community hospital in Canton, Ohio. And one of the biggest problems we ran into, because I think every single initiative that you talked about, we tried to enact, and everybody would be on board with that initiative till they weren't. And it'll always be reversion to the mean. It would be, well, you know, it's this, it's that. And so basically what that ended up happening is just going back all the time to the mean, to the mean, to the mean. And as far as the blood work, looking out for costs, choosing wisely, going with the surgeons, coming up with special orders, trying to eliminate blood work, unnecessary blood work, chest x-rays, et cetera. I just found it interesting that not long ago, our hospital was bought by the Cleveland Clinic, and all of that, like there is, from what I've seen so far, there is no trying to control costs from blood work, chest x-rays, anything. So it's been frustrating. COVID basically did me in after 10 years. Somehow I was responsible for, myself and the head of the intensive care unit were responsible for coming up with all the COVID policies for the entire hospital. Yeah. And so I stopped after that. But a lot of things you say were really frustrating, because no matter how hard you try, unfortunately, you have a lot of individuals that are involved that we're not responsible for. We don't employ them, surgeon, the whole thing. So that was just kind of frustrating for me.
Yeah, now that resonates with me. It's like trying to turn an aircraft carrier around. If it doesn't want to turn, you can push on it all day long, right? And it's a big source of disengagement and dissatisfaction. We have a protocol that I tried to change for years called the rush roll. And it sounds fun, right? Because it rhymes. And the surgeons what it is an emergency case coming straight to the operating room. Well, we know that from studies in Vietnam in 1968, almost no cases have to go straight to the operating room, right? But we get these rush rolls. Rush roll coming up, click. We don't know the patient's name, age, allergies, nothing, right? And it's not almost never somebody that's got a clamp on their aorta with an open chest. It's somebody that's got epidural hematoma that's starting to lose his thing. I said, so can you please just give us a call, talk to the anesthesiologist in charge so you don't put a patient in an operating room that has no anesthesia staff in it? They will take the patient straight to the OR, right? And there may not be anybody in the OR. So I said, in the interest of patient safety, can we just call the attending, stop in the holding area for a minute if you can, so we can do a pre-assessment? And every time they did that, they wrote my name in a little book and said, this is how we're causing them problems for their emergencies. Like, okay, you know what? You do whatever you want. It does. It leads to frustration and disengagement. The system has to want to support it and want to change. And that comes from the top down. If it doesn't, it's very hard to do it from the bottom up.
Yes, sir. Having been in Vietnam, I really understand what you're saying. Do you see this whole conundrum of the beast getting larger, of this slower and slower inertia moving toward a single payer system?
I don't know if that's intended or unintended consequence, and I'm not sure that helps. I've been visiting professor in Canada where it's a single payer system, and it's very different in the cultural expectations of what happens, right? Because in Canada, they work until they run out of money, and then they just don't do anything for the rest of the year. So that usually happens in early November. But I was visiting professor in Montreal the year of SARS, so they run out of money by September that year. So the anesthesiologist sat around having coffee waiting for the occasional emergency case, and they did no elective cases the rest of that year. So sometimes beware of what you're asking for, right? Because the single payer system is not going to be on demand. I want my laparoscopic chole done tomorrow, right? Or my add-on eyeball needs to get done today. We know that patients in Canada wait a long, long time for surgery, and that keeps hospitals in Minot, North Dakota busy because Canadians with means come across the border and just pay cash. So I don't know. It's what I see, at least in the anesthesia space, is in the next 15 years, maybe less, the emergence of some sort of other provider that's less than a physician CRNA and more than a medical student, so some sort of LPN level, associate's degree level anesthesia, quote, provider that can do half of the cases safely with good medical direction and monitoring. Is it optimal? Of course it's not optimal. But I'm not sure how we sustain what we have now.
Hi, great talk. This is directed to either one of you, but I always try to take two problems and figure out a way to solve them both. With the workforce shortage, and especially in underserved areas, and the unsustainable, how expensive it is to get anesthesia help, is there a way? It seems to me we need to increase residencies. Excuse me. Increase residencies, and also it would help. Having residents would alleviate the workforce issue. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's another $1 million question, right? We know there's a workforce shortage. We know that the bottleneck is residencies for the most part. In anesthesia this year after the match, there was one open anesthesia residency. So anesthesia has become incredibly competitive and in high demand. We'd like to increase residencies. Now, unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences, or maybe intended consequences, of the ACGME AOA merger was a difficulty in creating new residency training programs. That's payer mix aside, right? Because we know most residencies are paid by CMS. We know that with some exceptions, many hospitals are capped and cannot add residencies just for cost purposes. But we've also worked with hospitals that create residencies out of pocket because they need the future physicians, and they'll just be willing to pay the resident salaries as the cost of doing business. But it's no small feat to create new residencies, because on the AOA paradigm, residencies were done at community hospitals with good training. In the ACGMA paradigm, they were done at large Jackson Memorial Hospitals in Miami with a very different paradigm of care. It doesn't make one better than the other, but they're different, right? And the ACGME sees everything through the lens of an 800-bed Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. And it's harder to get the idea of a specialty residency across in a 125-bed community hospital. It's doable, and we've done it, having put up these different medical schools, but it's no small feat. Putting up AOA residencies was a different and facilitated process than it is today. So I don't have a good answer to that. I know Congress is looking at creating more spots. There's so many logistical difficulties. 10 years ago, the VA had 1,500 residency new slots allocated to the VA. Today, there's still 1,200 slots left because they just can't figure out how to utilize those slots and create new residencies, and there's a lot of reasons why, but it's not simply a matter of allocating slots. It's the ability to create good, high-quality residencies in the environment that we have, and we haven't fixed that problem yet. And a lot of smarter people than I am are working on it, but as you can see from the VA example, we're not making a lot of progress. As I said, I think we need more medical schools, more residents, more physicians. Well, I know we do, right? We know we're a shortage. Even in northern New Jersey, which you would think would have an unlimited supply of healthcare providers in Jersey City, New York metro area, they're predicted to be up to 20,000 primary care physicians short by the end of the next decade. So we're not meeting that. I'm not sure how we go to that, but I know that I haven't seen a physician for a long time now going for healthcare. I see a lot of PAs and nurse practitioners.
Thank you. And putting on my advocacy hat, this is something for the last many years at the ASA Legislative Conference. We've always been encouraged, go to your legislators, talk to them about the need for more residencies. And last year, this May, we went and they were bragging about how they got 80 more residency slots in the CMS budget. And of course, most of those went where they weren't really needed, but 80, when you have a need for thousands, we all just kind of laughed and like, well, that's great, but let's do something. But again, you're talking about one bucket of money and allocating that money in such a way that you can get more physicians, which they, unfortunately, many see as just increasing costs. They don't see the value in it. They just see the more doctors we have, the more you're going to charge, the more money we're going to have to spend. That's short-sighted, of course, but.
In the 1960s, there was lots of residency funding. Why? Because every single third-party payer had to pay in to residency development. All the insurance companies, all the third-party payers. Well, over time, they sort of all backed out because they figured out they didn't have to do that, and leaving Medicare holding the bag, which is why most residencies are paid through Medicare. Then in 1997, Medicare said we're not paying for any more residencies in hospitals that already have residents on their cost report. And what we commonly see is one resident on a cost report kills the hospital's cap. So say the University of Arkansas may farm out residents in family medicine to 10 rural hospitals, one resident at a time, and after 5 years, they can add no more residents. Now, there have been some changes to legislation for rural hospitals to address that, but again, we're still working under 1997 rules back when people were saying, well, there's going to be a physician oversupply, right? That was the early 1990s. Well, they could not have been more wrong, but they haven't changed legislation to accommodate because, as CMS has said, I've talked to the administrator of CMS, like, we're not in the education business. We shouldn't be paying for residencies. The Department of Education should be doing that. Why are we doing this? We're having to pay for diabetics to get insulin, and we're having to pay for insulin. Why are we having to pay for education of physicians? Yeah, we get that's our patients, but why are we holding up the bag for everybody in the United States? And they have a valid point, but what happens?
Any further questions? All right, thank you all for your attention and your comments. Thank you.